Good morning, friends. Hello, hello. How are you this morning? How are you in this new week that we find ourselves in? Have good morning to you. Doing great on this beautiful day. Good morning, good morning. I'll give our new First Congregational travel mug. Very, very snazzy. Everybody wants one. Hope everybody's doing great this morning. Give it a minute. Have a few people come along. A lot going on this week. We've great baptism coming up on Sunday. The baby Bell. It's going to be terrific. All manner of things. Good morning. Hello, hello. All right. Hope everybody's doing great today. Hey, Marianne, good morning. How are you? I'm appreciating your posts. I've been I train my training is rucking, so I try and get out and in the morning and put some miles under some weight. And I've been because we've been traveling and the like, I've been kind of out of my element. So I've seen a couple of your posts and I'm like, gotta get back to it. Actually, it's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. So anyway, thank you. Like I would say that. Good morning, everybody. Let's get going this morning. It is the 9th day of September. On this chilly morning, it was 51 degrees when I walked out this morning, which is chillier than I wanted it to be. I'll be honest with you. So welcome this morning on this Tuesday, and welcome to 11:11. I hope wherever you are, wherever God has planted you this morning, I pray that you are no blessing. I want to start with a reading from Titus. Now, nobody ever reads from Titus because it's kind of a drag. But Titus is one of kind of three books, three epistles, to letters. Basically, they're fancy Bible word for letters that were written as letters of instruction about how the church should be. So, like how we're supposed to behave as people, basically. So it's kind of a drag because it's like, well, you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. It's a big long line of letter of shoulds in a lot of ways. And so you have First Timothy, which is instruction to Timothy, go figure, and then a second letter to Timothy, so Timothy was really dear to Paul, as was Titus. And so this isn't Paul kind of writing letters to these guys, trying to beat them up. This is Paul sending letters to these guys, wanting to encourage them. So he's maybe giving them some instruction about how we should be, about how we ought to act. But he's doing so because he wants good things for them. And this is kind of classic Paul in some ways, that he doesn't necessarily spare the instruction in terms of what the way he wants you to be, and that there's this invitation into the spiritual life that in the Pauline sense is, well, it's going to be work. And I think that even though he gets tarred with the brush of like, oh, we're saved by grace alone, but that if you done a deeper read to Paul, that is not really true. And if you really want to look at it as true, read First Timothy, Second Timothy, and particularly Titus. Titus is a short book; it's 3 chapters, but it's all about this is the way you ought to be. Like, and it's Paul is unapologetic, telling you what you ought to do and how you ought to be. Now, granted, he's in the first century, all this sort of stuff. Okay, qualifiers over. There's at the end of the second chapter, he's given a bunch of instruction, as he does in each chapter. But he says he has this one kind of run-on sentence now that to Titus, and so I want to read you this, not only because it's a run-on sentence, but there's this sense of it. So it says this: For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age, waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for a good work. Man, that's like, that if that that doesn't make you tingly. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, there's this, but at the outset of this is, for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions. This notion of training is, we're we don't talk a lot about it within the spiritual life, and yet we're constantly in the act of it, and we're constantly in some ways in need of it. That this assertion that the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, and that the grace of God is training us to get rid of the things that don't work in our life, to get rid of the things that are actually holding us back from joy and peace and love, that are actually holding us back from the ability to shed these things, from being able to fully receive the good gifts from heaven that God wants to give us. And I spent a lot of time in the Army, and in the Army, if the Army does anything, we think it goes, breaks people and, breaks stuff and hurts people, but really what it does is train to break stuff and hurt people. Like, that it spends way more time training than it ever does doing anything else. And that training is everything, because what the Army understands is that combat, that the austere conditions in which armies are operated to work require people to be trained, and trained well, to do their jobs, because the jobs in which they're going to do in hard places with little sleep, under austere conditions. That's the reality of how armies operate, and they're going to do some of the most difficult things in the world, like hurt people and break stuff, which is actually a terrifically difficult thing to do. Both psychologically, emotionally, and for the human person. And so we're going to and to be able to contain that and do that. So that armies are filled with training manuals, with ways in which to do that. And that one of the phrases that was instilled in me in the Army was this notion that we train as we fight, meaning that often training can look like a rehearsal for something that we're not doing. Meaning like, you can notionally say that, oh, I'm going to engage, and I'm going to shoot over here, and you say I'm shooting over here, rather than actually like shouldering a weapon, pointing it in a direction, and doing the very thing. And so if you just say, oh, bang, bang, I'm going to shoot over there, versus actually going through the motion, that when you get in a position of stress, when you get in a position of that you're actually not going to be able to do the thing, that saying you're doing the thing actually isn't doing the thing. And we know this to be true, but you're also going to instill training and detraining habits. There's a tragic story of an officer, of a police officer, that lost his life in a police shooting. And what happened was, he had a revolver which had 6 rounds in it, and he was in a gunfight, and he shot the 6 rounds, and then he emptied the cylinders with the old one, and instead of simply reloading, he did what he had always done at the range. And at the range, what he had always done is he had emptied his cylinder, and he went down and picked up his brass. Now, you might think, I would never do that. Like, I'm in a gunfight. Well, I'm going to just reload and kind of try and stay in the gunfight. But that's not actually what happened. What actually happened is he had so instilled in himself the way, what you do after you're done shooting 6 rounds is you go down and you pick up your brass. You pick up the empty casings. And he actually lost his life in that gunfight because he bent down and started picking up his casings, because that is what he had trained to do. God's grace is, and it has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions. That training is actually critical to us in our spiritual lives. What are these patterns that we're doing? What do we do when we receive news that we don't like? How do we respond when we're actually in the fight? Because that will give you some ideas of how we are trained and how we're training ourselves and how we're being trained. There's actually an order of St. Titus that in the United States Army, it's actually the only award that the chief of chaplains can actually award, and it is an award for great chaplain trainers. That chaplains who are training junior chaplains to be able to care for others, to care for soldiers in the ranks. That when they identify great trainers, they're actually ordered the order of Saint Titus. Friends, we're, I think, all invited into this notion of not just being trainers for ourselves, but not just being trained in ourselves and being trained on our own, but to look at how we are being trained. What are we doing with the spiritual disciplines that God has given us? How are we doing in terms of our engagement with the passions of the world? Like we say, oh well, I wouldn't I wouldn't do I wouldn't do that, but maybe on a small level, like that we compromise ourselves. That to think about, that we're often and if you think this is ancillary, they go through, that training gets talked about all the time. That Proverbs, the great Proverbs, train up a child as he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. This idea of showing a child how to be, or Timothy, to train yourself for godliness. Physical exercise is of limited value, but godliness is valuable in every way. How are we keeping to the virtues? To look at the virtues and say, what are we doing in here? Are we being courageous? Are we being chaste? Are we being, are we holding fast to what is good? Are we showing temperance? Are we showing magnanimity? And are we training? Are we actually inviting ourselves into these things? Versus, do we have habits? Do we have ways in which we're behaving that when we actually get pressed by the world, when we actually find ourselves in crisis, will lead us to really bad detriments? I even for myself, I'm always I'm a guy who's taken pleasure and comfort in food. Food has never disappointed me. It always loved me. A brownie and some ice cream will always solve all my problems, at least for a second. That there's this way in which we can, and that I can take comfort in that, and it will soothe me, and I'll feel okay. And and I'm not saying a bowl of ice cream is a bad thing. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm saying, but if what I'm doing is running into physical comfort every time I am sorely pressed by stress in the world, by stress in a relationship, by my own kind of wonderings about the nature of spirit, by my own feeling state, or my own confusion about my mind, or even the brokenness of my body, if I'm just running towards that kind of bowl ice cream or that physical comfort every time, well, what then? What is that? What am I going to do when it really gets bad? What's going to happen when it really gets a problem? And what is that? And where is that leading me into? How many pounds are you putting on? How many other sort of stuff? And that's a stupid and small example, but it's actually it's indicative of all manner of things, and we have to be attentive to these things. That we really are designed to be trained. We really are designed to be trained, and the world is trying to detrain us. the passions of the world are trying to detrain us. Our dog passed a while, late last year, and gosh, we still miss him terribly. But when we first got him, we were working on training him, and I'm actually a decent dog trainer. I've had dogs before. I've actually competed with them. Like I know a little bit about it, but I hadn't done it with my wife and with a small child there, with Ryan there. When we first got him, I'd kind of give him some tasks and have him working on stuff, and then all of a sudden they'd show up, and then we would do some training, and then they would do some detraining, and then I would do some training, and it's just, I'm not beating them up. I'm not saying I'm not saying they're bad people, or they just, it's just one of those things they didn't know, and we worked through it. It's a great dog. Don't get too excited. Don't say, don't, just, it's all right. But understand that these really are two instincts that we can train and we can be detrained at the same time. And so what are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to our souls? What are we doing to our bodies? What are we doing to our minds? What are we doing to our hearts? Are we giving him some boundaries? Are we giving him some space? Are we giving him some discipline? Are we giving them some rigor? Some intellectual rigor. Maybe we're reading something that will inspire something. Are we working our hearts? Are we spending some time in prayer and really working through? Really actually spending some time in prayer and say, oh, I'm going to pray, and yeah, maybe. Are we going to work our physical bodies? Are we going to actually go out and do some work? Make a meal for somebody, make a call to somebody, do some encouragement. Actually, do the things that are we going to behave in this trained way? And so, I hope you don't feel beat up today, or you feel afflicted, because that's not the point. Because the point is actually to encourage you, because and this is where I really want to. I really hope you will hear in the landing of all this, is that as much as we are, need to be about training, it's actually the Spirit that is working with us. It is actually God's great hope for us, and God's great vision for us, and God's great plan for us that is being played out, that we should be true and good and beautiful, bringing salvation not only to ourselves but to all people, and that this training is going on is not just our training. Like, we don't just have to do it out of sheer will, because will always loses. But we do it out of these great gifts that are in it for what God has for us. That is God who's bringing these things to us, and that we can align with that. We can get in the flow of the very will that God has for us. That God wants all good gifts for you. God wants you to be a stud and be beautiful and look good in a bathing suit. But, for some of us, and some of us, and that's, all of that is relative. I get it. But God wants all these good things for us. And I'm not saying that. Again, don't hear what I'm not saying. This isn't kind of, believe it and you can get it. But this is God's gift to us, is wanting us to come into, to bring us into relationship with Him, and whatever that looks like, and whatever that is, that entails, and that there is a training component to that, and it's God's process with us, that when we can ally with, when we can do those things that we can do, that can actually become this beautiful and incredible flow, which stops being about, oh, I got to go gut it out today, and starts being about, what great blessing can I receive today, as we hold together our lives. What great weight that I'm carrying can I set down today? What affliction that has a hold of me can I release today? That it becomes much more instead about this appearing of the glory of God in the midst of our lives. And so, friends, I hope you will you'll attend to your training, and that you will train as you fight these days. Be as you can be faithful in small things, because they will bring forth greater things. That in all things, that this notion of unceasing practice. The question is always, is always framed in this way of, are you a practicing Christian? Well, it's like everybody kind of jokes, laughs at that because, some people say, well, I'm not practicing, I actually am. But this notion of practice is the fact that it leans towards this, that we are always in this notion. We are always in being trained, not by our own will, not by our own wisdom, not even by the world's wisdom, but by the grace of God that has appeared to bring salvation to each one of us, to bring truth and good and beauty and all good gifts into our lives. And that is the great hope, and that is the great promise. So whatever you're training, I hope you'll get on it today, and I hope you'll get some, and that you will be attentive to those places maybe where things where you find yourself in patterns that are not serving you in the fight, because that God has all good gifts and all good things that He wants to bring to you. All right, peace and grace, my friends. Thanks. So glad you're here. Just want to say hi to everybody. Hey, Yvette. Hey, Karen. Good morning to you. Pat. Good morning. Glad you're here. Great to see you last night. Deborah, good to see you. Vicki, good morning. Hey, good morning, everyone. Peace and grace to you all, and we'll pick it up tomorrow with another 11:11.